Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another virtual artist talk here at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. This morning, we're going to be speaking with the estimable Alex Torres and Bruce Marsh, who has a beautiful show combining landscape paintings by Alex Torres and figurative watercolor studies by Bruce Marsh. It was a really elegant pairing and talking about many things, how paint works, and the relationship between the human body and landscape. We really enjoyed kind of mixing it up in this one. As usual, our lead curator, Catherine Bergman, has made a nice video and that's going to walk us through the show before we start talking to everybody. For those of you who aren't able to make it in, this will be a substitute for walking through physically. All of our videos, you can find them on our Facebook page, the Dunedin Fine Arts Center Facebook page, and you go to our videos. We also have a YouTube page. So that's the Dunedin Fine Arts Center YouTube page, and we post a lot of videos on there too, a lot of content. Let me navigate to the video here. Oops. Okay. Sorry, I don't think I shared that. Okay, here we go.
How are we showing the video now?
Yay!
Well, that's wonderful. It looks a lot better than when I executed the work. It's been such a great ride.
No. Look how lucky we are, though. To be surrounded by these gorgeous pieces right now. And each one is really a world unto itself. And then together, it's just a whole other encounter.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed when as I was looking through the videos, when you were doing the details and the work, for instance, the watercolors with the lines and just with the washes and such, also kind of mirror the, like when you zoom into the areas of my work where there's the scratched out surfaces and you see the watercolor bleeding through where the pastels would be at, layered on top. And it's like there's a wonderful kind of like a unfinished or gestoral quality to the work that seems to pair itself pretty well.
Yes.
I was wondering how it would all come together, being although being very classic subjects, landscape and portraiture. I was wondering how it would all relate, but it seemed to be a wonderful job pairing it. I was quite happy with it.
Yes, I think when we were considering pairing you and Bruce, Alex, there seemed to be a definite affinity with the fluidity of both of your works. But when you guys were delivering the works, I think Dolores just pointed out, which honestly hadn't really occurred to me, that stark contrast of the unpeopled landscape with the people. So it really was a joy to stage the pieces, and versus isolating your works on opposite sides of the gallery, having them interact with each other, and hope that this was an acceptable liberty that we took.
Yeah, although there's people and no people, almost as pertaining to the viewer experience, there's a singular awareness, if you will. My work is more about the personal experience as to how something is viewed, and for the person who's viewing it to bring in their own experiences and their own past and psyche and emotional components, and then find it in the work. Say how I experience landscapes, or at least I'm trying to portray it in this way. It's very much more an emotional experience, or something that's more innate to oneself, as opposed to something that's just a snapshot or some like still life or a rendering that's very photographic. And as to Bruce's pieces, I noticed that, although there's two that are large group settings, and then there's the singular body work, I find myself being also just a single viewer and experiencing the work quite in the same way as I would look at my paintings per se, and that I feel like I'm alone looking at this event or these group of people in the room. So it's almost like a singular awareness that's going on. So it's kind of interesting. I hadn't noticed that before.
I'd just like to take a moment to let everybody know we're going to focus on Alex speaking about his work first. And I'll just give a little background that Alex is Cuban American, born in Jersey and raised in Florida. And
I was trying to keep that Jersey thing kind of quiet.
And he lives and works in Tampa. And we were ascertaining before the the meeting started that you actually studied with Bruce briefly in early 2000s.
Sure.
Before Bruce retired from USF after 33 years of teaching. So there is that connection. So I loved you jumping in and speaking about the work, and I'd just like to invite you to take it away from here.
Sure. So the current series of work is more so an evolution of where I've been with my work, and just in nature or even in my head, and it has continued to progress. It seemed like earlier my work was like color field. It was more abstract, and there was very little what you would say references or iconography that would depict the landscapes. And now it is kind of turned into realism in a way. It's almost like it's going opposite of what the first abstract artists do. They would take something and abstract it. And I seem to be going quite the opposite direction. And why it wasn't necessarily a conscious decision, you know, something that I did become aware of and lately have continued to just go with it. And I really feel pretty happy about the direction of the work. And who knows, maybe it'll be like completely representational one day. I don't know, but I'm continuing to work, but not with that goal in mind. It's just kind of something that's just happening.
Now, Alex, is it correct that the works on paper were primarily created during your residencies in Iceland, and then the canvas works are recent? Is that right?
Yes, I would say I did a residency in Iceland a while back. It was a couple of years ago, and it was a genesis to what new work we see now. Because of the constraints of the plein air experience there with wind and rain and the whole shebang, it was very difficult to do any sort of large scale direct observation pieces. And so what happened was I took snapshots, photographs, and small little sketches, went back to the studio there, and then worked all night. I would say that after a while, that I would just kind of put the references down and continue to work from feeling more of what I felt, what I saw. And then that's kind of the direction that my work has been headed in lately. So while this particular show might not be focused on the work that I did there in Iceland, it has a lot to do in its creative process, the genesis of it being there, being how I started to work in this fashion, or at least evolve in this direction.
Yeah, I will just mention for this the sense around component that's missing as we sit in our separate rooms, that in the gallery there is a really rich scent of freshly painted canvas that arrived when Alex
Oh yeah, it was pretty fresh. At least one of them was really, really fresh.
We'll just throw that scratch and sniff element in from.
That's a curious comment. There's a scratch and sniff, especially with the scratches
Yeah.
in the works.
And I'll say with the media that you identify in the labeling, pastel. So I'm guessing it's oil pastel and the water media that's mixed. Is that right?
No, it's not.
It's
the pastel on paper is just a regular dry pastel.
Chalk
oil.
pastel?
I only use the
Oh,
oil pastels on the paintings, in which I incorporate a lot of oil pastel in the painting, and you actually see drawing and cross hatching in some of my oil paintings, and that is from oil pastel. The works on paper are primarily just regular chalk pastel, and underneath it there's like a washes of watercolor. So I kind of do a gestural composition as to where I want to go with watercolor, and I kind of cover it with pastel. However, leaving certain areas uncovered or taped over, so that we could see the watercolor underneath, if you will, and that produces that the element and the washes that you would see underneath the pastel.
It's a really successful melding, because I can't tell that the pastels are even present. You know, a lot of times you're dealing with the dust and the, but whatever, however you have worked those together, it's really a
Yeah, there's a copious amount of spray acrylic that goes on it. It's not even a fix. I'm just using like an acrylic varnish basically, and that gives it its more luminous quality to it. I keep in mind the changes the pastel have as it's going through the process, and so it's not difficult for me to work with it and see, kind of envision the final product using this type of medium. It's not for everybody, and it has its strong odor. So make sure to use have plenty of ventilation when using so much spray.
Now I'll mention that about your canvases as well, and that were it was evident in a few of the details, but they also have, I mean, the surfaces are so rich, lush, but there is a sealant or a varnish of some sort, right?
Correct.
That
Yeah.
and there's an interplay between the torn areas. That it was such a joy capturing the detail images for the video, and really they are their worlds unto themselves, just sections of the works.
How are the
Thank you.
edges blocked off?
It's definitely something that I hope to achieve, is in the detail of the work. If I feel like if I see someone actually kind of getting close and looking and then stepping back, I feel that I have been somewhat successful in conveying what I want out of the actual practice of painting. I find all the processes very enjoyable, and I almost wish sometimes that the viewer would engage as well and see it as opposed to just seeing the final product. It's one of the things that I'd always done. You could always tell if I'm in a museum or at an art show, if I'm really captivated by something by seeing the paintingly surface of it. If I'm just sticking my face in it and then looking for all those brush strokes or details or maybe palette knife work or things like that, I'm so just captivated by that. And I find it so alluring. And sometimes when I see the how the paint is smeared, it's almost it's a very it's sexy in a way to me.
It is.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, beautiful thing.
Yes.
So it's, if I could get that type of response, I feel like I've been rather successful in conveying a little bit of my process with the viewer as well, and that's kind of cool.
So Alex, we had talked a bit about this sort of, we'll just look at this piece here, the almost fragmentary nature of the layering, the different layers here,
Okay.
and how that kind of related to your time in Iceland when you couldn't really work plein air like you wanted to because it was too windy or cold or what have you.
Yeah,
and that
this is actually an interesting piece. It was from a photograph, a place I went called Búðir, and that's in the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. the southern part. It's a really beautiful place, and it's a place where people go and have weddings and such, especially in the summer. It's quite nice. Now, I kind of gave it a different spin. This particular piece was executed probably 2 years later, almost 2 years later, and I kind of gave it a more ominous look, just and that was probably a reflection upon my mood, myself, my own emotions going on at this particular time. So it's weird how I conveyed that into an area which was pretty light and sunny during the time. But I took the composition of the photograph and kind of changed it around a little bit. So the washes and the details, those things are all there too, like most of the work. And it's kind of like something I've always just been drawn to, things like in old photographs when you see the creases, or you see stains or areas where it's been bleached out or something, like you see 70s or whatnot, if they haven't been taken care of, there's a little bit of decay. I've been always captivated by those type of surfaces and find it, somewhat beautiful. The washes are, for me, they're immediate. They're almost like a gesture drawing. So that kind of captures the now when I see something. And then the pastels I use, I come back to the surface with pastels, and then it's like the process begins of trying to recant the story from the feeling with the image, if you will. So there's different views, I would say, different ways of how I looked at something being put onto one sheet of paper or canvas.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of how we experience life in general. How there's all these moments stacked on each other, both memories of the past, and then we're thinking ahead to the future, and then there's just things that we're observing or experiencing in the moment, and they all kind of coalesce into this three-dimensional world that we live in. But in these some of these works, actually most of your work, where you've used these washes and the tape to create these layers, there's that really, you've kind of almost shown us all the layers of experience in a way, which I really enjoy
that. And then there's definitely in I can show you the layers of the work through the process, in that sense as well.
Yep. Wow, beautiful work.
Now, am I right that through the course of the presentation that folks are welcome to ask questions as we go along?
Yeah, if anybody has questions as we go along, feel free to, I think there's a thing on here, you can raise your hand and I can see that, or you can, if you can manage to shout out, you can do that too.
What are you taping up? What are you blocking off the edges with? Is it tape?
Oh yeah, it's basically painter's tape.
Okay.
And sometimes I use like a paper or contact paper or something like that. But primarily it's a painter tape.
So Alex, behind you is a painting you're working on that.
Correct.
This blue shape behind Alex's shoulder is a work in process with the blue tape on it. So I don't know if you can all see that or not. Alex, you'll have to speak so everyone can see your screen instead of me.
Yeah. If not too close, and then you won't hear me correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is a work in progress with the blue tape that's still on there.
Are there any other questions for Alex at the moment? you can ask some at the end too, so.
Yeah, so we will thank you, Alex, and we're going to move on to Bruce. And so everybody keep in mind that there'll be time at the end to engage both the artists, but thank you, Alex, and welcome, Bruce. And I would just like to say that this is the third show that Bruce has been in at the Art Center of late, and we're so proud and honored. He was
It's a veteran.
one of his monumental paintings this summer in our show, I've Come to Look for America. It was a moment in time, one of his documentary style, large scale canvases capturing an airport. You know, in this time of pandemic, it was one of the few crowd scenes in that exhibition. And then Bruce was with us again in the fall in a show that we were honoring creative couples in the area, and he and his wife Dolores Coe had works in that show. And now again, which I have wanted to show your figures forever, Bruce. So this pairing with Alex was the perfect moment. And I'll just give a brief background that you, as mentioned, and most folks may or may not know, that you are a beloved professor emeritus from USF, having taught from 1969 to 2003, and therefore influenced so many of the artists that we love in the area as a mentor. And the watercolors in the show are from an endeavor that you and Dolores are devoted to in your community in Ruskin, and that is your Firehouse Cultural Center, where you'd had a weekly figure drawing class until the pandemic, as I understand. And I did just want to mention that I know that you've had opportunity to be included in 5 museum shows over the last several years, and are always working on commissions for public spaces. So we have those 2 beautiful large canvases in the gallery that I'd like you to talk more about, but take it away, Bruce.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. Well, the show is a great opportunity to sort of show these 2 threads of the work, and the idea that for years I've had a Thursday night figure group at the Firehouse Center, and that has been sort of a return to my original education as an undergraduate. Was focused around working from the figure, and now it's come around where, from the studies of the figure with the figure drawing group, I've moved into a whole series of paintings. We're looking at one now of people in very ordinary situations. Here's a drawing group, but working with groups of figures in space and the light, and it's just been an opportunity away from my usual work for years with the landscape, of dealing with very traditional issues about light and space. And I think of all of Western painting essentially being involved with these things. I think in both the watercolor and the oils, there's a real emphasis and a real interest in paint quality in and of itself, and that the idea of the way the watercolor flows, and it's essentially to some degree uncontrollable. And in the oil paintings, the fact that from a distance they have, I think, a conviction about believability, but up close they're blobs of paint. And I think that really is a real connection between the work Alec is doing and the work I'm showing here. That idea of really, I think, being in love with what paint will do, and in love with the idea of making things that will not pretend to be something else, but on any glance be involved with all of those things, that the flow of paint, in Alex's case, the scratching of paint, the layering of paint, is a very important thing. And I think that in a way, the entire history of entire history of painting is involved with this idea of the play between the fact that it's a flat surface, the fact that it's uncontrollable colored mud, and that yet it can be made into a thing where there's a real presence about space and light in our experience of the real world. I think that one thing I'm, looking at Alex's things, I think the emphasis on flat and deep space, the idea of having these very illusionistic passages of sky and sea, and then they're as if projected on the paper, as if they're somehow put on the paper, and the paper and the edges of these things emphasize the way that they're absolutely flat, and it just constantly, you can't get away from the fact of the flatness of the work and the way it sort of collides with or is radically juxtaposed with that sense of color and light in space and in deep space. The one thing about the figures I'll mention is that two elements there is in the drawing, I'm really concerned to try to be as accurate as possible in terms of proportion, in terms of the shape of things. And I want to make a very cohesive, accurate drawing of the figure. And then the watercolor acts as a real sort of randomizing element where I can't control the flare of the flow of that pigment in the water. And so I just love the idea of playing against the presence, an accurate presence, an accurate rendition of the figure, and then bumped up against the way that the accidental flow of the color meshes with that or contrasts with that. A thing I'm very aware of about the figure studies is they're almost like academic or student studies, in the sense that I'm not making, very rarely do I deal with any of the surroundings of the figure. I mean, I will, here's a sketch with a chair indicated, but it's like my whole attention is on the figure and not thinking about making compositional unified paintings at all. And so it's kind of odd. I'm really attracted to that working directly from the figure, and I've missed it during the pandemic. But that you glance at the figure and the figure is crystal clear. It's very simple. There the person is sitting in the light. You can, at a glance, you see the whole thing. But then to try and make an image of it is hugely frustrating in terms of, are you going to look at the local color? You're going to look at the lights and shadows. You're going to deal with the textures. You're going to deal with the juxtaposition of different parts and different light. And so it's very interesting, that contrast between the simplicity you see in the glance at the figure and then the real struggle in terms of somehow finding things about that you can deal with with pencil and watercolor. The group paintings, two of which are there, the drawing group painting and the painting of the dancers, both came after I'd begun doing these figure studies from the figure group. And I've probably done at this point, perhaps a dozen of these fairly large paintings. And I try to choose a situation that's very common, very innocuous. In other words, there's no political, there's no social commentary here. I'm simply taking the groups of figures and making what I feel like are almost documentary paintings. This one of the dancers, it happened on the top floor. There's a dance company in the old Whitney Museum. It's now the Met Brower in New York. And there was a group of dancers that were rehearsing, and we watched for a while, and then I made the photographs, and then it struck me that it'd be a very interesting thing to paint. And so I've always, with these group things, sought the most ordinary surroundings. There's not, as I say, no political, no personal, no cultural content there that you're supposed to dig out. I would like the painting and the act of composing it and the act of dealing with the light and color to be the main issue. And I will say that there's a huge enjoyment in both of these things, the watercolor studies and the big paintings, that it's a struggle. It's always a struggle, making the elements somehow come together, somehow be convincing. But when they do, it's a high. It's a huge pleasure for that to happen. And so it's like, it's the act of doing it is a reward in itself, you know.
Now,
And,
Bruce, I saw recently, I think on social media, one of your current large scale canvases, and so it has the underdrawing visible. And I remember you talking about on the airport piece for I've Come to Look for America, how you do use a grid, but you're not interested in a precision or accurate rendering of space. So if we looked back at the dance image, Nathan, the dance painting, can you speak to that, where you're not necessarily striving for a photorealistic capture of space?
yeah,
Somewhat distorted.
certainly. I work from photographs. I have a number of photographs. Sometimes the paintings will be drawn from 3 or 4 or 5 different photographs. But I grid the photograph, and I grid the canvas as a guide to placing things. And the thing that happens, attempting to be as accurate as possible, you draw the figure, and then you draw an adjoining figure, and you find that they're way off, you know, that the negative space between them is very different than what you saw. And so the struggle of drawing them, and I am trying to be accurate with the drawing, but in it, all sorts of deviations occur. And I think that they animate the work, they give life to it, that it somehow gets very transformed from looking at a photograph. And that, in fact, the act of drawing it, then the act of painting it, somehow it seems like it could be almost just some mechanical kind of thing. Oh, you're copying something, but it takes all kinds of invention and all kinds of changes to make the thing work. And that at the end of the process, if the painting works, there's something that's leaked into it. There's some quality there that I could never anticipate or I could never control, but just the fact of struggling with all the different aspects of it, somehow something else creeps into it. And
so you're making all those decisions of editing out elements. Like when I look at the painting in its entirety, the composition is so, it just really kind of, yeah. So you've edited out all sorts of extraneous elements from the photo that have brought us to this moment.
It's very heavily edited. In other words, there's a great deal of stuff that I select what I will respond. You know, I select the doorway or select some lights or cameras that are above the doorway. You know, but there's a great deal of other stuff that I decide I will edit out, you know, and so it's a selection and editing out process. There was something I was going to say and I forgot it.
But Bruce, I just want to jump in here real quick, and
Sure.
I want to talk about how I lit this piece in particular. So when we're lighting pieces in an exhibition, you know, normally we want to cover the whole surface with a light, so it's kind of uniformly lit. But on this one, I noticed, you know, this guy in the corner, in the back corner here on the right-hand side, you know, he's already in shadow. And so I focused a lot of the light more on the dancers rather than edge to edge, and kind of tried to bring that out a little bit more in the painting. So that was, it was fun. This one was a fun one for me to light, you know, play around with that idea.
Very interesting, Nathan. Very interesting. That I'd not thought of that. One thing you notice, you know, the whole back wall, the brushwork often stays very raw, you know, and the brushwork it's not a question of making really smooth, finished, but you can see all the changes of color that move through that back wall. And in fact, move through the floor. It's all, if you look closely, relatively crudely painted, you know, and it's like, well, I think of it as blobs of color. And I really like the fact that when you, on close inspection of the painting, it's blobs of paint, you know, it's odd shapes of paint. It's not some smoothly, obsessively finished rendering of any sort. And one thing I'll mention is that if the color and light of the place, if I can get close to getting that, the figures just fall into place. That if the space is convincing, and in fact, they'll often give more attention and have more problems with the place they're in, with painting the space and the light, than with painting the figures. The figures will often just as I say, fall into place. So.
Well, I wanted to touch on something that we were talking about earlier about the relationship between the figure and the landscape, and how this is a really elegant presentation of that. And you know, just speaking to everyone who's joined the meeting today, or the talk today, about, you know, the sort of conscious effort on our part to include in your figure studies both male and female figures. And then it got me really to thinking last night when I was thinking about this talk today. I was thinking about how, you know, we always talk about the earth in, you know, in Western culture anyway, we always talk about the earth as Mother Earth. So it's always a female, has a female identity. So I think it's sort of interesting if you want to take it in this direction. You don't have to, but by presenting male and female figures, it also suggests that maybe the earth has male and female qualities as well. So I kind of like this this notion of redefining our relationship to humans and the landscape. So thanks for letting Catherine and I mix your work up a little bit in the show.
Certainly. Well, you know, my whole the huge balance of my career has been working with landscape and working with often very close views of Florida landscape and sometimes mixing images together, but working with the landscape with no reference to either figures or buildings or any evidence, with no evidence of there's any human beings around. And I once in a gallery talk someone said, well, why don't you ever paint figures? It's a few years ago. And I said, well, you know, people always screw things up, you know, that I just wanted to stay away from that. And but then just from the figure group, it's just I've become hugely interested in dealing with the figure. It's ourselves, it's our body, and I've also recognized the problems. You mentioned the male, female, and certainly there's male and female aspects of any landscape, you know, and however complex those things would be. Are things smooth and soft and curved, or are things ragged and pointed and whatever, you know, what's male and female. But I recognize, and I worry a little about the whole thing about the artist's gaze on the human figure, and there's been a lot of course, looking at art history and observation of the fact that the female figure dominates in art history, and it's seen as a objectification. You know, that these aren't figures; these are objects. You know, that treating people, particularly the nude woman, as if an object. You know, and I've hoped that my approach to making a real point of trying to make the way I represent it the most important thing, the way that I let color flow, the way that there's swatches of things, the way that, well, just that the general struggle of presenting my perception of the thing, and perception has been an important part of my work all the way through. But that hopefully they won't fall into that category where they seem to be elements of the male gaze.
Yeah.
I will also say that there's a good book on the nude, Kenneth Clark, and he quotes a Victorian critic saying any nude that has elements of eroticism or elements of desire or elements of sexual appeal is a real failure, that painting shouldn't have that. And Kenneth Clark says, in fact, the very opposite is true, that he thinks it would be very false to have a painting where elements of eroticism, of desire, were ignored. And so what I'm saying is, I think those are inescapable things of our human condition. Our human condition is you know, the sexual content of our experience and the sexual content of our consciousness is undeniable, you know, and
Yes.
and that so
Well, I want you to know, Bruce, that
Yeah,
Bruce, we had
I'm
some,
right there with you.
I don't know if
Very
I
much,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Bruce, we had some guests in here a couple of days ago when I was talking to them, and they were looking at your figure studies, and they did mention that they mentioned both the mix, you know, it was nice to see a mix of genders, but also they commented how, you know, they look like real people, you know, they're not idealized in any way. And so I think people are picking up on that these are, you know, genuine, authentic, beautiful works of art, and a real look at real people, as you say, a more documentary kind of look at people. So, you know, whatever you're doing, it is coming across.
Good.
And, you know, this totally unprompted, by the way, you know, I asked them how they liked the show, and they launched into that conversation. So it was, yeah, it's good. It's a good conversation to have. So.
Sure.
And Bruce, this might be a silly question, but I did wonder, when you are doing the figure sessions at the fireside, I mean, you are doing the watercolor, you're doing the pencil and watercolor at the same time. You're not doing the renderings first and then the watercolor later.
Oh, no. It's all done. And in fact, I think I think some of my most successful are with no pencil drawing.
Yeah.
Okay? But that's also fraught with problems. And the problems are, without doing the drawing and drawing directly with the brush, I much more often make a mess and make very failed things. And so I tend to rely on the, it's almost like the drawing, the pencil drawing is almost like a gesture drawing in a way. I try to do it as quickly as possible. And then I never touch these after I'm finished. You know, it happens in that 20 minutes or that half hour or that 40 minutes of the pose. It all happens. And there's a quality to that. There's never enough time. There's never enough time. If you have a 20-minute pose, you need 10 more minutes. If you have a 40-minute pose, you need 40 more minutes, you know. And so there's always a sense of, what can I grab in this short period of time that will build a cohesive thing. And so there's always this thing. It's an intense experience. It's like the problem is never over, of sitting in front of the figure and trying to decide how to attack that in 20 minutes, you know, or in 30 minutes. And I like that. I do have a lot of failures. These are selected from what I think are the more successful.
And you have hundreds of these.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Say it again.
You have hundreds of these.
Oh yeah.
Watercolors.
I have hundreds. It's been
Yes.
6 years, and 6 years of every week doing 3 hours, and I'll get, you know, 6 or 8 paintings out of the 3 hours. So you can do the multiplication, and several thousand of these exist, in fact. And so I sort through them, and occasionally I paint on the backs of the paper, you know. But anyway.
I wonder if anybody else has questions for our artists among our folks in attendance. I can't see everybody, but
If I go to gallery view, if I can see everybody.
just
Does
want to.
anyone, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and just kind of shout out if you'd like.
Hi, it's Kimberly. How are you doing?
Oh, hey, Kimberly.
Hi.
Kimberly Engel, one of our artists in Transcendental, the show in our Gamble Gallery right now. It's
Okay.
an exquisite show. What's your question, Kimberly?
Actually, my question is for Bruce. I was wondering if you have ever done self-portraits in the past, and if you have done any self-portraits lately. And the question just kind of came because of how you were explaining that you are not able to work with the group. And I understand that you use photographs for your large scale work. So I was kind of wondering what you're working on now, and if you ever do self-portraits, and if so, if you ever show them.
So I haven't in years done any self-portraits, and it always is there, kind of. I think thinking, you know, as I get up in the morning, and look in the mirror, I say, "My God, what a landscape you've become," you know. And but I've avoided it. But it's something that has been in my head to do, and but I'm not currently doing them. And if I did them, if I had some, I'd as soon show them as these. And that is something to think about. It really is, because I'm always there, you know.
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I just think it would be very interesting. I think, you know, just seeing you through this little Zoom camera, and your just expansive history and what you're capable of creating. I visited your website just briefly, and I was blown away by one of your big oils on aluminum that depicted a beach scene, and I think it was called Weather.
Yeah.
But it's just the way the light and everything. And I just have one more question, and then I'll stop. When did you start painting on aluminum, and how does that work? Because I would assume that creates such another added luminosity to the oil paint.
No, it's confusing because I paint on the aluminum. I find it's permanent. It's very inexpensive. It's much easier to prepare panels than building stretcher bars and stretching canvas. But I give it 2 coats of gesso, and so when I'm beginning, it's the color and a texture. It's not a canvas texture, but it's a texture left by a roller. I roll it on, so there's no aluminum showing through. And I think it confuses people. People think I'm using the aluminum for luminosity, for the reflective qualities, and that's not at all. I'm starting with a very opaque white surface from gesso, and it was just an impulse to try something different, and I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure I'll keep working that way. I did a lot of plein air painting, early part of the 20s, and for some reason, maybe transportability, etc., with my plein air painting, I always worked on panels, and they were, in that case, plywood panels. But then, and I realized that I was liking the rigidity of that surface and the solidity of the surface, not the give of the canvas. And so then I heard about some people painting on aluminum, looked into it, and it's a pretty simple thing. I can, you know, it's easy to prepare and all that. But anyway.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Kimberly. Thank you.
Are there any other questions out there?
I have a question for Alex.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh,
Lawrence.
Hey,
Hi there.
how are you?
Closure.
I'm in the corner. Alex, I'm just wondering about, in talking about process, at what point you started with the torn edges, what appears to be the torn, but the taped edges, and how did that begin? And then from one to another, to me, thinking about landscape and torn landscape and all, and we've been talking a lot about process, but really both with the figures and with the landscapes. To me, there's an awful lot of expressive qualities in these. And I think from one to another, these suggest something different. And I'm just wondering about how you think about, I mean, are you starting?
Well,
How
that's
started it?
cool.
About that.
Hopefully there's a lot of expressive quality to it. I don't know exactly how it started. I really don't know. I'm trying to like think back, and I think it was probably a portrait drawing that I have, and you know, there was just like there was these like missing pieces, and I think I just started playing with the negative space in it, and I never finished it, but I grabbed onto what was going on there and just shifted it over to the other work that I was doing. So sometimes I draw different things like figures or whatnot, and it just was something that I was playing with, like somewhere else in my head, and it transferred over to what I was doing. I said, well, let me try this, and then then it's just the edges became action and activated the surface,
Exactly. Yeah.
and it provided quite frankly, a lot of visual interest to me.
Yeah.
So I just continued to play with that, and probably will even expand upon it, you know, just because the all of a sudden I got away from the square, and the negative space has become important. That the space around the work is important. So it's just a much more activated type of surface for me, visually too.
Mhm.
And whenever there's a tear, whenever there's a drip, you get those senses of the surface quality being in action. That's why the like dripping on canvas or whatever surface has a strong quality, and you're reminded almost on a subconscious level of gravity because of the flowing of water. So there's that action that happens in process that's there, and I kind of enjoy that. It's you know, it breaks away from the photographic nature of how we want to snapshot the world. It seems like we just, you know, take pictures of everything, of course, because it's a convenient thing. Everyone's got a phone and a camera, and you know, I mean, if I wanted to paint without drips and torn edges and all that kind of stuff, photography. The process to me is so enjoyable that leaving it in there for the final composition it's become more meaningful to me.
I'm really struck, Alex, by how cutting around the edges of the image really enhances the color. Somehow the color isolated against, you know, or contrasted with that white paper around it just seems to really get punched up and rich by that process.
Yeah, I think that's a simple contrast. And now I've started to do black edges. So it has like a pinhole quality to it, and then it just whatever action is going on is emphasized. And I think you nailed it there right on the head. It's a contrast thing, and it highlights and really punches through whatever other colors happen to be where the action is, you know.
Yeah.
So the edges per se might not be the focal point, but it drives to the focal point.
I think for me, it gives the overall works a very collage read.
True, that's true.
Yeah.
And this painting in particular, I realized that I was seeing the torn vertical areas. I started to read those as figures. I don't know, the scale and the placement in the horizon. I started to see them as characters in this play.
Yeah, well, I can't say that that is an intention of imposing figures on the work, but it, like I said, you know, a while ago, I kind of, it's strange in a, you know, artist journey. As when I was a younger artist, I felt, wow, it's my vision. I want to control the narrative, and I want to, you know, prescribe what's in there, and to hell what anybody else thinks. And now I feel like I get much more joy, in almost allowing the viewer to attach the narratives that they see in the work. I feel that it enriches the experience. You know,
Absolutely.
it's funny that we were talking about the male and female and human, and how kind of nature and the environment all relates. And you know, if you look at a more primordial or even cosmological type of viewpoint, it's all the same. Um, in a way, humans and landscapes are kind of the same thing. We're all part of the same existence. If you want to look at this type of stardust quality, we're from the earth is from us, and you know, it's all part of the same universe. It's part of what grand design or complete
Yes.
existence, so
Yeah.
to speak. It's all part of the human experience, is also part of natural experience. And we are living things. We have living memories, and the earth is a living thing and has a living memory. And while my work is not necessarily environmental in nature, or I'm not making statements as such, I do hope to have at least in that sense, what I would call it, maybe moral awareness of surroundings, um, through experience, through our experiences. So while I couldn't say that my work is based in any sort of activism, I do at least want awareness in that sense for the work, and our space, and how we share the environment, and how we share kind of our viewing experiences, and how we, you know, we take things in, even though it's kind of an individual experience.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we will probably end here on that note, and thank you, Alex, and you, Bruce, and everyone in attendance today. And we will extend the invitation to come and experience the works in the physical. We'd love to see you, and it's very safe here at the Art Center between our temperature taking, the masks required, and just the size of our facility. You'll find that you may have the gallery to yourself, and we hope that you will come in person. But this was wonderful to hear the stories behind, and to have you with us today. Nathan?
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been a really special conversation. Thanks for your availability. Thanks for your work. Thanks for letting us take some liberties. And of course, thank you to our community and membership, and all the students who have been coming in and continuing to take classes with us. There's a plein air class right now, right in front of the doors that you see on the screen here. Or I don't think it's plein air. I think they just work outside. So kudos to them. And then of course, thanks to our board and our leadership and our entire staff for supporting Catherine and I in our endeavors. There is one more way to experience artwork here at the Art Center, and it's through our enriched curator tours. This is a very special program that allows one to experience and engage with art in person again, of course, with all focus on safety and health these days. It is limited to groups of between 5 and 8. We need at least a 1 week advance notice so that we can corral all our cats and get everything organized. It's a really fun program. If the artists can come in person and speak in person, they're invited to do so, or they can join us via Zoom. And either way, you have a way to engage with the artists in real time in front of their work. So give me an email if you'd like to arrange something for your group. And otherwise, we'll hope to see you in and look forward to, what do you call it? We can't hug anymore. We'll air hug you.
Air
though.
hugs. Air
Give you a
hugs.
fist bump. I don't know, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much. Very
Have a
much.
great
Thank you.
weekend, and
Yes.
we'll hope to see you all soon.